Okay, I hope you all had a good lunch, right? Question is, can you stay awake? So let's, we talked about ecology, we talked about hydrology, and now let's bring the two together in the context of ecohydrology and go through a couple of key concepts that I want you to understand. So the learning objective here is end of the lecture. I expect you to understand the interconnections between ecological systems and water cycles, and you should be able to examine their implications for managing natural resources and addressing environmental challenges. So we talked about it, right, that how ecohydrology is at the intersection of hydrology and ecology, and it draws from the concepts of the two disciplines. And by doing so, the aim of ecohydrology is to solve complex environmental problems and enhance sustainability in a way that it's multidisciplinary in nature. And therefore, ecohydrology focuses on interactions between biological processes and hydrological cycle, and it provides insights for effective ecosystem management and conservation. For a long time in my career, until I actually completed my PhD, I was focusing solely on hydrology. Do after that, and my PhD advisor at that time, he suggested that I should go and work with a number of biologists. He said, go work with them. You will develop skill sets that's going to serve you well in your career. And so I did. I went to University of Alabama, and I worked at the Center for Freshwater Studies, and I worked with a number of stream ecologists. And in the beginning, there was a language issue between me and them. They would be interested in a very small scale, what happens at a core that they bring to the lab and trying to understand the different processes. And I would say that, well, it doesn't matter, in hydrology and at the scale at which I work, who cares, what happens at your core? And they would say, well, how can you do the large scale modeling if you don't understand what happens at a small scale? It took me several months to learn the language, and perhaps for them to learn my language so that we could start working together. And it was very enriching experience where I worked on a number of natural wetlands and helped them understanding the hydrology of natural wetlands, and once they evolve, how they evolve, because they are natural, they are always evolving, and plants are always evolving, and they help me understand how the hydrology changes over time, because natural wetlands are evolving over time period. And that's when I realized how much important it was to bring that into what I do in hydrology and what I do in water quality. And when I look back, that was one of the best decisions I had made in my career, to go and work in a setting that was very uncomfortable to me in the beginning. And perhaps it was uncomfortable for them to take a risk in me, in bringing me to their group to bring this large scale perspective that I was really good at. So I encourage you to venture out. I encourage you to talk to people who are outside really your expertise, your domain, and you will be glad you did that. So if nothing else from today, from this lecture, I want you to understand these three key hypotheses that are bedrock of ecohydrology. And these three hypotheses are listed there. One is that the key concept of ecohydrology is that hydrological parameters in an ecosystem or a catchment can be manipulated to control the biological processes. That's first fundamental principle in ecohydrology. Hydrological processes can be used to manipulate biological processes or control biological processes. Then you reverse that. That's the second hypothesis in ecohydrology. The biological structure of an ecosystem within the catchment can be manipulated to regulate hydrological processes. And the third hypothesis is that integrating both hydrological and biological regulation at the catchment scale in a synergistic way can achieve sustainable development of freshwater resources, right? So let's think of an example, right? Give me an example of the first hypothesis where hydrological processes can be used to manipulate biological processes in a catchment. Tell me more. Yeah, so that is true. So how would you manipulate evapotranspiration as a hydrological process to control the biological process, right? So that's the fundamental, that you can manipulate hydrology to control or manipulate biology. So how would you manipulate evapotranspiration in an ecosystem to control what is happening in the biology, and what would that do to the biology? Yeah, yeah. No, so that's great, and you are absolutely correct. Give me a practical example. Yeah, so you're talking about the second hypothesis. I'm still on the first hypothesis. How would you manipulate hydrology to control biology? Yeah, absolutely. Right? You are connecting the rivers. Therefore, we talked about the minimum flow or environmental flow this morning. And by that, you are going to affect the environmental flow, and that is going to impact the biological response of the river. Right? You can manipulate the flow to create a wetland, and wetland is then going to have a very different biology compared to non-wetland or unsaturated conditions, because wetlands are mostly anaerobic or anoxic. There are different kinds of bacteria that are working there. There are different kinds of nutrient cycling that happens in the wetlands. And so to control that, because all the nutrient cycling, most of that is biological in nature, you can control the hydrology, or you can manipulate the hydrology to control what happens there. So that's the first fundamental principle of ecohydrology. And I want you to absolutely understand that, because it is at bedrock of everything that happens in that field. The second one, give me a practical example of how you manipulate the biology. You talked about population and population dynamics. Give me another practical example. Construction of dam. Okay. Tell me more. We are controlling the biology here, right? Construction of dam is mostly, to start the control of hydrology. That leads into something else. We are talking about controlling the biology. changing the type of vegetation, right? And so practical example I gave you this morning, when the two ash trees, ASH, ash trees that were in my front yard, beautiful trees, 60 years old. Vamsi, you had seen those. And they died of emerald ash borer. And not just my two trees, but literally tens of thousands of trees in my hometown at that time, West Lafayette, Indiana, were destroyed. That changes the evapotranspiration that happens, that changes the microclimate that happens, and that changes every other component, right? Here are forests that are dominated by ash trees, and very few of them are left. And suddenly you have got a very different kind of ecosystem that is going to have a different hydrological response. So that's an extreme example. That happened naturally because of the climate change that's happening. But you can intentionally, you can engineer that kind of a system. Yeah. I'm laughing because I don't like that concept. I know where you're going. No, I mean, border control among countries is absolutely important, but the way the wall is constructed, assuming that everyone from Mexico who is coming is a criminal is wrong, my friend. Movement of wildlife is also affected. Yeah. And that's what happens when the forests become patchy and you don't have a corridor to ensure their movement. But here we are obstructing the corridor of humans' movement. Tell me again. Increasing cattle growth along the small water bodies, right? So what does that do? That increases the water demand, that increases the deposition of animal manure, that carries a lot more phosphorus than nitrogen, right? And because fresh water bodies are phosphorus limited, excellent example. It will eutrify the water body very, very quickly. And that's really an excellent example of how this works, where you are controlling, you are looking at a biological structure of an ecosystem to manipulate the hydrology. And then, so when we are doing the watershed management, right, and when you are looking at what needs to be done to improve the quality of a watershed, whether it's from the water quantity side or whether from a water quality side, you need to bring both of these things into your assessment. And I hope that, end of this workshop, you will start thinking in those directions, because that's really what needs to be done. So everything has a history, and ecohydrology, even though it came into limelight really around 2015 or so, it has a long history. First time in 1919, a Swiss Federal Research Institute engineer, Arnold Engler, who did a paired catchment study. I mean, can you believe it? It was like 105 years ago, 106 years ago. And showed that forested catchments produced less runoff than catchments with 1/3 tree cover. And to me, he is the father of ecohydrology, even though we didn't know that term probably until 2015, nearly 100 years later. In 1930s, Hirsch already understood the importance of transpiration, canopy interception, groundwater links, and many other topics that are related to current ecohydrology. And I encourage you to go and look at the paper by Hirsch and Bretter. It's fascinating read. And then ecohydrology as a new paradigm, it came from a UNESCO project that was started in 1996 and came to full blown attention in 2015. So some of the milestones, Odum's fundamental work on ecological engineering, and he showed how wetlands can be used. as nature's kidney, just like our kidneys filter and purify our blood on a regular basis. Odom is the one who showed that wetlands, constructed wetlands, can be used in the same way. And the whole science of ecological engineering came out of that. UNESCO started this first eco-hydrology program, and then in 2005, hydromorphology gained prominence, emphasizing the landscape level water management. You know, why we need to look at the entire catchment and not just a small area. And then 2015, eco-hydrology became a very common word. So it's relatively new, right? There are not many areas, at least in hydrology and water quality context, that are so new. So key components include evaporation, condensation, precipitation. We talked about all those things. Professor Vamsi talked about it. Infiltration, runoff, and storage, as influenced by biological processes. So how do the biological processes influence these things? Because when you're working as a hydrologist, you're looking mostly as non-biological processes. It rains, and therefore 30% of that is runoff, right? How is that a biological process? Vegetation impacts, rainfall interception. In Amazon rainforest, as much as 40 to 60% of the rainfall can be intercepted, and it never reaches to the ground because of, and then it evaporates. It's not a transpiration anymore. You know, it's intercepted and it evaporates. There is a term called hydraulic lift. Hydraulic lift. Has anyone heard about that term, hydraulic lift? What is hydraulic lift? Uh-huh. Yeah, so that's hydraulic jump. Hydraulic lift is different from hydraulic jump. Hydraulic lift. In eco-hydrology concept, it's a beautiful process that happens. In deserted areas, you know, there are deep-rooted trees that go very, very deep to be able to get water to survive. And then small saplings germinate. There is no moisture near surface. There is absolutely none. They would not survive. These trees take water from their deep roots, bring it near surface, and releases it for those smaller saplings to survive. And it's a beautiful process how they work together so that there is a succession that happens, and there is a water that is provided to smaller trees otherwise who would not survive in that environment. And in eco-hydrology, that is what hydraulic lift is. So how, you know, you can think about how that affects the evaporation or evapotranspiration. In a classical sense, it becomes hard to predict that you won't predict evaporation happening from that deep. But because these roots are bringing water and releasing it near surface, now suddenly it becomes available for evaporation. And it's the biology that is controlling that. So what is the ecological impact on hydrology? You all know that none of this is new. You know, forests, they enhance groundwater recharge, they reduce runoff, they improve water quality. Wetlands acts as natural water filters and flood buffers. Communities that have got wetlands around them, they do well. They survive during hurricanes or cyclones compared to communities that don't have wetlands around them. And then grasslands affect soil erosion rates and surface water flows, and they protect soil from eroding. So this is another concept that I really want you to understand. You know, what happens in a river continuum as it goes from headwater streams to fourth or fifth order full-blown river. And so most interesting from ecohydrology point of view, this headwater streams are the most interesting part in the ecosystem, in the catchment. That's where you are getting nutrients that are coming. That's where the nutrients are processed most efficiently. That's where most of the energy inflow is coming in the form of carbon input that are needed for microbial activities. And so it's a very active zone in a river continuum. And there is lots of transformation that is happening where the biomass is growing near those headwater streams. You know, the picture that I showed from Peru. There is also a lot of retention that happens of those nutrients within the headwater streams. There is a trapping in the plant biomass, and some of that may be seasonally removed as the fall comes and the leaves fall, and then the carbon is released back into the soil or back into water. But there is lots of seasonal trapping happens. There is a lot of storage in unavailable pool that happens, that is not available to be eroded and transported as a runoff. And much of that also gets trapped in the benthic sediment or bottom sediment. And so this is most active and most interesting zone from ecohydrology point of view. Then as it moves and becomes deeper, there may be areas around the stream, not in the stream, but around the stream, that may go anaerobic at times. And because they go anaerobic and there is nitrate that is transported downstreams, in those anaerobic zones, there is a lot of denitrification that happens because of the microbial activities that are thriving on lack of oxygen, and they derive energy from denitrifying. Then, of course, you know, the sedimentation happens in the river valley and in the backwaters, and a small retention happens. But there is also a self-purification that happens, and I will have a lecture completely on that part, how rivers are self-purifying and how the nutrient cycling happens in the river systems, how it goes from dissolved to biota to sediment and comes back, and how that can be used to evaluate the health of a river. We will have the whole lecture on that. And then, of course, they get dislocated and then get recirculated because of the spiraling that is happening. So understanding all these processes in a river continuum is quite important. And as we go through the SWOT exercise, you know, I don't think SWOT can do all of this, but SWOT can do some of the components. So those of you who are looking at new problems, think about where you can go and improve the processes within the SWOT model, so that it's looking at ecohydrological processes in a much more comprehensive way than what it can do right now. There is a lot of scope to do that. And those of you who are looking at some of the things that are already there, such as, you know, trapping, such as denitrification, our group did look at lots of nutrient spiraling and how that affects the nutrient transport downstream, how you can go and improve those processes, or how you can use that to make watershed management decisions. There are lots of really good research ideas that can come out from here. So looking at the biogeochemical cycles and water, there are lots of strengths and lots of limitations in how the nutrient spiraling is modeled in the SWOT model. But they are tightly linked to the water cycle through the leaching, runoff, and atmospheric deposition. Does anyone know the nitrogen content in rainwater in India? I'm asking because I don't know. but how much of nitrate or nitrogen deposition happens through precipitation, through rainfall? Any idea about the magnitude? Is it 2 kilograms per hectare per year? Is it 10 kilograms per hectare per year? Is it 50, 100? Look it up. That may be your homework tonight. It's good to know, right? How much nitrogen gets through rainfall? Point 0.08 to 0.22. So that's 0.08 to 0.22 milligram per liter. And now you can calculate how much precipitation happens in Warangal. How much precipitation does Warangal get? Come on, now you guys need to know that, those who are from NIT Warangal. How much is precipitation in Warangal? There is a whole group sitting here, right? That's where the practical knowledge comes, folks. How much is the Roorkee? How much is the precipitation in Roorkee? 1100. 1100 what? 1100 millimeters a year. That sounds right. About 1.1 meter. 925 or so. Yeah. So now you can calculate, right, that how much nitrogen is coming purely through atmospheric deposition, and how that is going to do to what is needed for whatever crop growth that is there, and what it is going to do to the water bodies that may otherwise think about a pristine lake in Himalayas, around Roorkee, that may not otherwise be getting any other form of nitrogen, because there is no other nitrogen applied, but yet over time it will eutrophy because of the atmospheric deposition. We talked, someone had a question about that this morning. So nutrients from fertilizers, waste and plant matter are washed into water bodies during rainfall, increasing nutrient loads, and nitrogen compounds from air pollution are deposited into ecosystems and water through rain or snow. Now, I have used this term limiting nutrient few times, today. Do you guys understand what a limiting nutrient is? Red fill ratio. Has anyone heard about that term, red fill ratio? Look it up. Red fill ratio tells you that, what is the nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, or nitrogen, phosphorus, carbon, not potassium, and ratio, C to N to P, carbon to nitrogen to phosphorus ratio, that is in equilibrium. And when that equilibrium is broken, the one that is less becomes the limiting nutrient. It means that when the water body sees more of that nutrient, it will accelerate the algal bloom. So generally speaking, nitrogen is limiting nutrient in salt water systems, and phosphorus is limiting nutrient in freshwater systems. So it means that as soon as there is an excess phosphorus getting into the freshwater systems, your lakes, your reservoirs, you will start to see an algal bloom. And opposite is true for oceans. It's really the nitrogen. There are exceptions to that, but generally speaking, that holds true. So look up at rate fill ratio and what that rate fill ratio is, and then you can suddenly will start to make sense that why applying animal manure as a sole source of fertilizer to land is problematic. You will be able to explain that. It sounds right, but from eco-hydrology point of view, there are challenges, there are issues when you do that, because that ratio is not right. So we really need to be bringing the whole concept of ecohydrology into how we develop our river basin management or watershed management strategies. And because it focuses on maintaining ecological integrity while meeting human water demands, and it includes flood and drought management and preservation of water quality as well as biodiversity. It can help us restore wetlands. Disappearing wetlands is one of the biggest environmental threats that we face today because of the development pressure, because of climate change. And as I said, the communities, coastal communities that have the wetlands around them are protected during hurricane or cyclone periods compared to one that don't. And so there is a lot of emphasis on wetland restoration and what needs to happen. Your knowledge of ecohydrology will help you come up with better design solutions when you are restoring wetlands. And then looking at ecohydrology in agriculture optimizes water and nutrient use for higher yield and environmental sustainability. There will be a whole lecture on ecosystem services and how you look at ecosystem services as an endpoint of management when you are looking at watershed management. We will spend a lot of time on that. And then some of the techniques that include is managed aquifer recharge, contour plowing, because it increases the infiltration, and vegetation strips to reduce runoff and increase filtration. In US, there is a law that if your agricultural field is next to a stream, you must leave certain width of land as a vegetated filter strip. You cannot plow all the way to the edge of the stream, and you cannot apply fertilizer all the way to the edge of the stream. You must leave certain distance uncultivated, under permanent vegetation. It can be grass, it can be shrubs, it can be trees, but there has to be a certain buffer strip that needs to be maintained. And the idea of that buffer strip is that as runoff leaves the agricultural field and it's getting into the stream, it interacts through that buffer area, it slows down the runoff, and because it slows down the runoff, it increases infiltration. And so the dissolved nutrients will get into subsurface zone and not get into the stream right away. Because it slows down the runoff, it will promote deposition of sediment, and sediment attached pollutants will not get into the stream, and therefore the health and quality of the stream is protected. The whole concept of ecohydrology at work. I don't know whether there is anything like that here or not. Probably not, because of the limited land and every square meter is precious. So you can look at the applications, right? And when you're doing the watershed management, you can start with you can actually start here, that what is the objective? What is it that you're trying to accomplish? And even if the goal is to maximize the agricultural production, you still need to bring the ecohydrology into your assessment. And you will have more tools as we go through the workshop. You will have tools on ecosystem services, and you will start thinking about the concept of ecosystem services. And then, so within that, what is the water resources issues that need to be assessed, and how do you assess that? What are the policy, and how do you do the long-term planning so that your solution is sustainable? How do you do the integrated water resource management that Professor Vamsi talked about? And how do you develop a basin action plan? And then how do you implement those actions? Once you have implemented it, you need to close the loop. You need to monitor to see whether they are actually working or not. And then take it back again. If they are working, great, keep doing. If they're not working, go back and do the tweaking. But closing the loop is very important. We very rarely do that, right? You do the modeling, you say this is what needs to be done. Someone goes and does that, but do you go back and see whether it actually worked or not? that's one of the areas where we scientists generally fail. And when we fail, it erodes the trust in the people who are using your information to implement something. And therefore, it is very important for you to go back and close the loop, to go and actually say whether it worked, how you thought it was going to work or not. So a very important key point that I want you to take away. And so, as we look at the eco-hydrology and look at eco-hydrologic processes, climate change keep coming up, and it will keep coming up in everything that we do. So within that, can we enhance some resilience and effective watershed management? How do we do that? You need to be thinking about climate change impacts and then addressing the human impacts, anthropogenic impacts. Urbanization and agricultural expenses, expansion, stress water resources, really two of the biggest stresses. And then how do you integrate eco-hydrology into land use planning? You will have tools to be able to do that. So with that, I believe that is my last slide. No, there is more. Technological advancements. How do you utilize remote sensing and GIS and hydrologic modeling that you're all expert at and you will be expert at, and how you use these tools to improve eco-hydrological management, and then use that to inform the policy. That's a big need worldwide. The policy is rarely informed by the science. It is your responsibility, scientists, to help communicate your science in a way that it can inform the policy, and policy decisions are based on what science is telling us. What not gets the vote for the politicians. So on that happy note, questions? 3 things I want you to know, right?